Hi guys, welcome back on my channel. My name is Helge Maus from Pixeltrain. If you followed this channel for some time, you maybe know that I asked my patrons and also my followers on YouTube which kind of compositing software you want to use to comp your VFX or 3D shots, and which software you want to learn more. And most of my followers told me that they want to dive deeper into NUKE or learn NUKE from scratch. And I think NUKE is a really good investment into the future if you want to go professional with VFX and 3D. Because NUKE is the de facto standard for node-based compositing in most of the studios I know and trained at. And the basics and the fundamentals of node-based compositing is extremely clear inside of NUKE, because most of these techniques are invented here, beside of Fusion Studio, I know. And so it's a good investment, like I've said, to learn how NUKE works so that you have later better chances to talk to other professionals. Also, if you later don't work with NUKE directly or you cannot afford it, if you learn the basics of node-based compositing, you can use these basics also in other packages, for example, inside of Fusion Studio or even with the free version of Fusion inside of Resolve. And maybe you've seen my little tutorial series about the Blender compositor. Also there you can use some of these techniques. So let's get started to learn NUKE together, and we want to use now this NUKE practice hours in the same manner like the Houdini practice hours. So I don't teach a full training, which I normally do with company trainings or individual trainings. I want to use more a project approach. So in every Houdini practice hour, which is sometimes an hour, sometimes 2 hours, we want to take some assets and we do something with that. And I set a topic over every of these practice hours. This time, for example, we have the topic, let's get started in NUKE. So we learn a little bit about the interface, how it works, and some paradigms. And then we start a little bit of 2D compositing and write our first comp out. So I think this is a good start for learning NUKE. And if you then have questions, please let me know. You can write in the comments below. You can also write me an email if you like. And if you like what you see, please give me a thumbs up and subscribe my channel. And like I've said, I'm really happy if I hear from you what you want to learn more. And maybe you also need training for you or your company. So I'm really happy to help here. From my profession, I'm a senior 3D and visual effects trainer. On the 3D side, I work mostly with Houdini and Blender, and for comp I use NUKE since many years. I think I started with NUKE 5, but I can't remember. I had then a full publication of 16 hours for NUKE 7 published, and now we are back making tutorials for NUKE. So let's talk now a little bit about NUKE as a product here. If you go to Foundry, the manufacturer of NUKE here, and you go to the NUKE family, you will see that we have not only NUKE, we have a whole family around that. We have NUKE, we have Nukex, we have NUKE Studio, and then we have also a non-commercial version of NUKE, which you directly can download without any costs and start comping for learning purposes. And if you're a freelancer and you want to use NUKE professionally and commercially, but you don't want to afford a full NUKE Studio, which is extremely expensive, I can tell you, NUKE Indie is a really good alternative, and thanks to the Foundry guys, this is really now affordable. It's 450 euro a year, and you get a full NUKE Studio for that. And if you go here to the comparison list between your NUKE Indie here and NUKE Studio, the full commercial version, you see that there are many green ticks here. So some limitations which are important to talk about here is that you are not allowed to use this version if you have more than $100,000 a year income in your work. So this is the first limitation. And you also have a limitation in the size of your plates. So you only can work with plates up to 4K. If you save out your NUKE script, it cannot be opened with the commercial version of NUKE, but you can work in your studio with that, so no problems at all at this point. Then you also have a little limitation here if you write your own Python scripts. So you only have, I think, 10 10 commands here. But this is something you don't need too much, so I don't think that this is a game stopper. So all in all, it's an extremely cool package here. It's not completely cheap, but it's cheap enough to start with that. And one of the big plus points, and thank you Foundry for doing that, is we now have OFX plugin support also in the Indie version. So you can use third-party OFX plugins. Great. So let's get started in the software itself. So I started my Nukex here. So let's start with a little tour inside of Nuke. First, let's talk about the different areas here. You see here my Nuke has a main menu. And inside of the main menu, we don't find many functionalities. The most important ones are here under files. So here you can generate a new comp, which is a NK file. So a Nuke comp is saved as a NK file, and everything is referenced to this file. So nothing in the file itself when it comes to images or things like that. Here you can save your comp or a new version of the comp, and you also can import other comp parts here with the help of that here. Then we have here the workspaces, which mean how the user interface looks. We work here for today in this compositing layout here, so you can select that. And then it looks exactly like my UI here. What many people do is they switch here to full screen. So some people like that a little bit more. Then you don't have a menu here, and you get the menu back. If you go here with your mouse to the top, then you see here the menu, and you can switch it on and off with the Option or Alt-S keyboard shortcut. So that's that. Then we have some viewer options and render options, but we talk about these menu items when we need them. Then in the user interface itself, we have here different panes. And to see something going on here, maybe it's a good idea to add an image here to the tree. And the first thing which newbies normally try is they go here to File and try to find something where here is an import button, but there is no import button. Nuke is a full node-based compositing system. Everything you do, every step is a node. And for reading something in, you need a read node. So let's add a read node. I hover over this area here, which is node graph, and I press the R key on my keyboard, and then I get a read file dialog. So the R key triggers that I want to have a read node, which is able to read files into the node graph, and now we have to select the file. Maybe your read dialog here looks a little bit different. So there's a little triangle here, which opens up a preview area here, which I find extremely useful. And I've placed here some files in my training data. So under images, you see here a whole bunch of files. So you can select a PNG, for example, or a JPEG here. I also have a Photoshop file here. And this funny looking thing here is a bunch of JPEGs. There's a little tick here, which is named sequence. If you deselect that, you see that these JPEGs are numbered by the digital camera, and Nuke was thinking it is an animation, and that's the reason why it looks so strange. So if you want to read in an animation, what we do a little bit later, then you can select here the animation completely and press open here to read it. But in our case, this is not an animation. So let's take one of these files, for example, this file here, and I click open, and now I have a node here, and this is a read node. What you also now see is that beside of the node in the so-named node graph, where we lay out all the nodes, and if you come, for example, from Houdini, this is really clear. It's the same ideas like in Houdini, a procedural tree of nodes. We have here on the right side in the so-named properties bin, the properties of the read node. So every node which you add automatically generates here an area inside of the properties bin, and the newest node is always on the top. If you're finished working with these properties, you can close this area here. Don't be afraid, you don't close the node is still there, but you close here the properties. I do that here so that you see it, so the node is still there. And if you now want to have these properties back, you can make a double click here and you get here your options back to work with. So really interesting system here. And what we now want to see is how we see an image. And if you take a closer look here, there was one node before we started, which is named a viewer node. And a viewer node is the connection to this area here, which is the viewer. And you see that the name of viewer 1 here is the same like here. So this is viewer 1. And to see now the image, you can make a connection. And this is done with these arrows. You can take here an arrow, or you can also drag this black triangle here to get an arrow here. And I stack it into the viewer 1, and now you see this is the image which we now see. So you have to make a connection, and you see this number 1 is the buffer number 1 of the viewer 1, and now you see something going on. Now we can talk a little bit about these areas. Let's start with the viewer here. In the viewer, we always can see what we have hooked up to the viewer. So it's your checkpoint, how your image looks to a several state in your tree. And over the viewer here, we have controls, for example, on which layer we are now. Here we are on RGBA, but we also can switch here to the so-named alpha layer. And you see here the alpha, which is empty, so black at the moment because it's a JPEG. Then we have here the channel which is used for the alpha, if you have one. So RGBA is the layer .alpha, but we have learned that it's black. Then we have here a switch, which channels we want to see here. At the moment we see an image, so RGB, but you also can switch here to red, green, blue, the alpha, or only a luminance of the whole thing, and you see everything here as a keyboard shortcut. And if you go here to RGB back and you want to see the red channel, you can press R while you're over the viewer, and that's important in Nuke. It's always important where your mouse cursor is. So that's the pane in which you send your keyboard shortcut. So if I press R here in the node graph, you get a read node. You see, let's take another image here, this one here. So because I pressed R here, we have a new read node. If we press R here, you will now see that this is a toggle for the red channel and Y for the luminance and so on. So these are the channels. Then we have here 2 sliders, and these sliders are really interesting. We can use f-stops here to stop an image up and down. And this here, really important thing is it's only for the viewer to help you see better what's going on in the image. Your original image is not changed. So this is not a way of color correcting, it's only a helper. And if you change something here, so this was the f-stop, this is the gamma, you see it here in red. So that's a reminder for you, oh, you have changed your viewer and don't believe what you see here. You can go back here by using a toggle here. So this toggle switches between the changed one and the original one, you see. Or what you can do, every slider inside of Nuke can be resetted by control clicking on it. You see, if you control click a slider, everything is back to normal again. Okay. Enough about the viewer here. We talk about the viewer in the next lesson a little bit more. Then, like I said, these are the properties. Now we have 2 nodes here, and you see the newest node, read 2, is now on the top, and the read 1, which we worked before, is now underneath that. So that's the way it works. If you want to bring read 1 up, you can double click here, read 1, and it's now up again. So this is the idea here. And if you've finished it, you can remove them here. Or what you can do, another thing is, if you want to clear out all of these, you can use this button here, which is remove all panels from the control panel bin. Goodbye. So this is housekeeping. I open both again. And if you want to leave them here but not use them at the moment, or you want to get rid of widgets, on-screen widgets, you can close the panels here and open them here again. So you see some nice options here. Another thing which sometimes is really useful is you can float them. You see this button here, float these controls, then you get a floating window of these here. Sometimes useful. Okay. And yeah, I think that's enough for properties at the moment. There are some more things, but yeah, this is something we can talk about later. Then we have this area here. And this area is our so-named toolbox or toolbar. In this toolbar, we have subcategories of nodes. So here we find all the nodes. So we don't have tools here, we have them here. For example, if you look for the read node, you can go to the submenu, which has the name image. And if you click here, here are all the image nodes. And here's the read node and the keyboard shortcut also. So if you want to have a node here, you can select that. And one important node here is the viewer. So sometimes you do something like that. You select a viewer node, backspace, and now the viewer is gone. Oh my gosh. If you want to have the viewer back, you can go now here and take a viewer node here, and a little tip here. These trees can be extremely big later. And Nuke always generates the node where you have clicked the last time. Let's see. I go here and I click at this point here. Okay, and now I go here and generate a viewer node. And now you see, that's the point where this viewer node has now happened. Same thing for other node operations. For example, I click here in the middle between these two. Now I press the B key, for example, to get a blur node, and you see my mouse is here, but the blur node comes here. So it's really interesting in big trees that you remember that. Click somewhere in the tree to tell Nuke where you want to have your next node. Okay, so here let's go back to the viewer, or Command I also makes a viewer, and connect this here up so we see our olives again. In the toolbar, we have different sections here, and these are the images, some draw tools, time nodes here for retiming and working with time, channels. Then we have color nodes, and color nodes are for grading. So Nuke is a really powerful grading system because it works in 32-bit linear color space, really a good color-proven system. So here you have a whole bunch of grading nodes. Then we have filter nodes, and I know from many trainings that most people are a little bit shocked if they come from other applications, for example Adobe After Effects or Fusion, if they go here to the filters and say, what? That's everything? No more effects? No. Nuke is not an effect engine, Nuke is a compositing application. If you need more effects, you can download some of them for free, or you can buy some of them, or you build them by yourself. But these are the typical nodes you need for compositing. So you have here blur nodes and some other stuff which we will use in this Nuke practice hour and later, but you don't have a whole bunch of effects. This is more bread and butter for compa. Then we have keyers, because we use a lot in 2D compositing, green screen, blue screen, and things like that. And here you see all the power keyers you maybe have heard of. Keylight is something which you maybe know from Adobe After Effects, but there's also Ultimate or Primate or an IBK, Gizmo, and so on. So you have a whole bunch of keyers, really powerful keyers. A layer system, then we have here transformation nodes and also warping nodes and things like that. If you look a little bit deeper here, we also have, where it is, the tracker node. This is a 2D tracker. And beside that, if you have Nukex and if you have NUKE Indie, you have Nukex, because you remember you have with NUKE Indie the biggest version of Nuke, only with your limitations of size and your income and so on. So the planar tracker is part of Nukex normally. So you have a full planar tracker built in here. You also have a 3D camera tracker built in here because it's a part of Nukex, and we will work with these tools in later lessons. Then we have a full 3D space, and this is a really important concept inside of Nuke. If you come from applications, for example, like let's say Adobe After Effects, you're really used to solve many problems in 2D space, and this is absolutely okay and possible also in Nuke. But for some things, or for many things, if you are used to work like that, we use the 3D space, and Nuke has a complete 3D space inside of the compositor. So if you go here over the viewer and press the tab key, you see now we are in the 3D world. And if you come from 3D application, this is absolutely complete 3D space. You can add models here by using these 3D nodes here. So you have light sources here. You can import geometry, which is really important from your 3D applications, and also animated geometry, really cool. You can generate from your 3D tracked scenes, point clouds and things like that. You can remodel them with a model builder. So this is a full-fledged 3D interface. Also you have some primitives here, so you also have shaders to build your shader here. Then we have renderers to render everything out here again, and so on. So this is a different approach how you comp. And if you want to go back into the 2D world, you see you're in the 3D world, you see it here. You can press the tab key and then you are back in 2D. You see this tab key here brings you between 2D and 3D, or you can use this drop down here and use these keyboard shortcuts to change here the viewport for yourself. Then we have a 3D particle system, also Nukex, a deep workflow system, which is extremely powerful in high-end compositing. Also in here, stereoscopic tools. And then if you, for example, say, yeah, but I need effects, I need fancy effects, then you can license, for example, Sapphire tools. Because Sapphire gives its package also out as OFX compatible plugins, and that was the point where I said that Foundry now opened also this interface, so the OFX interface for the indie users. So if you have Sapphire, then you can use here the OFX plugins inside of Nuke, and that's really cool. What we also do a lot, I will teach you that later, is you can add your own stuff here. For example, Cryptomat is an external tool which is free. You can install it here inside of Nuke if you know how. And here I have a really great tool I want to talk about later about this Nuke Survival Toolkit. Really great tool, thanks to the guy who's maintaining it. And here you see all kinds of external tools, gizmos and so on, which are now inside of Nuke, and you directly can use them here without installing them by hand. So this is our toolbox. If you want to add nodes, you can use here the toolbar. This is good for beginners because you have to learn, okay, look for something which warps something in a grid. So maybe I go here to transform, search here for the right thing, like a corner pin or grid warp or so on. But if you are used to work in Nuke, then you know the name. And for this, we really often use the tab key here over a node graph. So you see now you can type what you search. For example, you search for a blur, and then you get a list of all the blurs here from the Sapphire tools, or here from the gizmos, or here the original blur. And then you can click it here and you get a blur node here. So you learn more and more the name of the node which you are searching for, and for this the tab key is a really cool thing to work with. If you want to get rid of this thing here to have a little bit more space and you are searching for a structure like this, you can also use the right mouse button. And you see from image down here, this is the same like the toolbox. So you also can work from here. And you also have seen that some of the tools here, for example, read, write, or blur here, for example, have keyboard shortcuts, and yeah, these are something you also can use if you want to be a faster comper. Let's talk now a little bit here about the navigation inside of the software. It's really simple. There are different ways of doing it. The official way is you hold down your Alt key or Option key, and with the left mouse button you pan. Works here for the node graph and also for the image. If you hold down the Alt key and use the middle mouse button, you can drag left and right, so it's zoom, and the same here. If you have a middle mouse button, it also works without holding down the Option key, you see, and you also can pan. And if you have a mouse wheel, you can zoom in and out also here. If you want to frame something, you can press the F key while hovering over the panel. Now you see this is F. And over the viewer, there's also home, so H key brings you home. And yeah, then you have the image a little bit bigger here. So that's the way it works here. Now let's talk a little bit about these viewer pipes, because I think that's important for the first step to understand what's going on. If you want to connect nodes, you use these arrows here. You see you drag them out here through these triangles. And you also can remove them. You can't remove them here in the middle, you see it doesn't work, but if you want to grab them here at the arrow tip, you can grab them and release them outside. Or what you can do is you also can open the connection here. If you are really close to the node, you also can remove it here. To hook up a viewer is something which you do all the time, so there's a really nice keyboard shortcut. You see maybe that here at the viewer there's a number 1. And this number 1 says it's the buffer number 1. And if you want to connect the number 1 buffer here with some of these nodes, what you can do is you go over the node, select it, press the 1 key, and then the connection is done. If you now select a different node, press the 1 key again, the connection is now there. So yes, this is buffer number 1, and this can be really fast here to hook up We will talk later a little bit more about these buffers and what you can do with that, but I think that's a good start to understand how the whole system here works now. So let's talk really briefly about the user interface here, because I think you will run into problems if you make now experiments here. So let's bring that out of the way. You have these areas here, and these areas are panes, and inside we have these panels here. And you can take these things here and move them around, so to make a little bit more or less space. What you also can do is you can have tabs here. You see there are 2 tabs, for example here, or here you have 3 tabs, the node graph, the curve editor for animation curves, and the dope sheet for animation keyframes. But you can have more of them. So let's take a look here. You want to have in this area here, for example, more tabs. So you can click here on this little menu. In the left corner here, this is a menu. And in every of these areas, you have this menu. And if you click here, you see a whole bunch of operations. One is splitting these areas. And this is really useful. For example, I want to split this really big panel here in 2. So I click here first and say I want to split it vertically. Now I have a second area here. And then I can click here on this panel thing again and say, for example, I want to have a new window type here. So I go to Windows and say I want to have, for example, a pixel analyzer. And if you add this here, you get a new tab inside of this area here. Great. And then you can add another one. So let's go in here again and say, what about, let's take something interesting, an error console. Yeah, we also want to have an error console. Now we have 2 of them. So this is one way of adding stuff to your UI. What you also can do is you can bring them into a float mode, which is really interesting for some operations. So you can go over the pixel analyzer and then make a right mouse button, click on it, and you can say float it, float pane. And now you see you have a floating pane of the whole thing. Now that's an idea which you can do. And I close that again and I show you the whole thing again. So pixel analyzer again. And what you also can do is, instead of float the whole pane, you can also float the tab. So that's the tab here. So you have a little bit more control about that. What you also can do is you can rearrange stuff. For example, you have 2 tabs here. If you grab a tab here, you can move it to the front and to the back. You see they reorder here if you like. And you can bring it into other areas. For example, I make this area smaller. I want to have the pixel analyzer now in this area. I take it here at the name, and now look here. Now you see, if you bring it over another pane, you can have these dotted lines around the whole pane. So if you release now, it's only 1 tab here. I bring it out again, and I bring it in again. Now you can also go to the top and the bottom, and then you see, then you get a split. And if you now release, you split the whole pane. Yeah, and the same is for left and right. You see, it works also like this. If you want to get rid of old panes which you don't need, click here and say close the pane. And here also close the pane. Yeah, so we have something like that. And I don't want to have this thing here. I want to have it here behind these, and then we can close the pane also here. So you see, it's a really flexible system. Goodbye to the tab. We can do that here. And if you have destroyed your UI and you want to have it back, go to the workspace here and say reset the workspace, or you can use one of these predefined workspaces. Be a little bit careful with these save buttons here. They do exactly what they say. You save over an existing workspace. So in most cases, yeah, save your own here under workspace if you want to have your own. Okay, I think now you are ready to use these. A last thing which I think it's important before we start now comping is the spacebar. Really often you see that also on a big screen, these panes are a little bit too small. You want to see more of the image, and so. If you hover over a pane and press the spacebar, you see this pane in full screen. And that's really, really cool. Yeah, because now you're really working with the image. Spacebar again brings you out again. And if I make now a double click here, for example, to get the options or parameters of the read node, and I make them floating. Yeah, you can click here to float these controls. Or what you also can do is, instead of double clicking, which always sends the parameters into the properties bin, what you also can do is control double clicking. Then you directly get a floating window without the properties bin. And the last thing you can do is you can say, the properties bin is something I don't want to use. So lock this thing here. And if this thing is locked, you always get floating windows because Nuke is not able to place them here anymore. So these are some options here. Let's close them again. So why this is important? For example, I make a control double click here, a floating panel, and if I now press the space bar, you will see that these floating panels are still visible. So if you have some operation where you really need a big image and you still need some control about a node, you can make them float and then go to full screen with spacebar, and then you can work and still can work here inside of these panels here, make them smaller and bigger and so on. So I think for the first video that's enough. I hope you understand now a little bit more about the workspace. Last point before I end here and we go to the next one is, if you now need a second setup, you always can go here to File New Comp. And what happens is you don't remove the existing comp. You open a new instance of your Nuke. You see, if you do that, it takes a while and now you have Nuke. And if you bring this window to the side, you see now you have two of them. So that's the way you get a new comp here. And if you have finished your work, don't forget to save your comp as, and then you get a NUKE file. And don't forget that everything here is only referenced and it's not part of the NK file. So that's enough. My name is Helge Maus from Pixeltrain. I hope I see you in the next tutorial. And if you like this kind of tutorials, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up, and see you in the next lesson.